All right, now that the wing's all taped up and ironed down, we're going to go ahead and mount it to the body. There's a couple things we need to do before we actually get our bolts marked off. First of all, we need to make sure that the wing is square to the fuselage and straight. And there's two ways of doing that. We're going to be using a ruler. And what we're going to do, you're going to find a center point on the fuse. In this case, we just use the center half. So I'm going to use the top portion of the tail saddle right here. And I'm going to be measuring that to the tip of the ailerons. And then to go to square. And I'll use a ruler. Another way of doing it that works pretty well is just use some type of string. In this case, it might be hard to see in the film, but I've just got some 10-pound fishing line, and I'm just going to take that and tape it right here to the tip, right on the center mark, and then it'll just be a matter of holding it out and moving it side to side to make sure it's square. Once it's square, I'm going to draw a couple marks on it, flip the plane over, keeping everything in place, draw a couple marks on the bottom, and then I'm going to begin to measure out exactly where the mounting blocks are in the fuselage so I can mark the holes and get them drilled for the bolts. Being that the P-51 has an under wing scoop, I'm just going to use a piece of tape here to make sure that it's sitting up off the bottom, and it's going to be flat to the body, or flat to the wing saddle. So use a ruler here. I've got 31 5/8 there, and being careful not to move the body. I've got about 31 5/16. So I'm off just a little bit. What I need to do is lengthen this side. So put a little twist right in it here. It takes me to 31 1/2. And exactly 31 1/2 on that tip right there. So what I'm going to do is right here at the edge of the body, I'm going to make a mark on each side, holding it straight, steady. I'm going to go ahead and flip it over. And what I do here, because I know that it's square to the body at this point, where the center line of the fuse is, I'm going to put just a pen mark and a pen mark here on the wing at the center line of the fuse. Now I know that when I can take the wing off, as soon as I set it back in that position, I'm square. So what I'm going to be doing here is take the ruler. I like to hold the ruler approximately the way the airfoil is going to sit on to kind of mimic the bend of the bottom of the airfoil. And I just eyeball down. I know that this mounting block here is at an angle, that the bolt's going to be coming up at an angle. I just try to imagine exactly where that bolt's going to be coming through this spot on the wing where I have to drill it. So holding it back, looking down, eyeballing it. I'm going to use the side with the 16th marks. I would say that the center of that is right at 3/4 of an inch off the front of the block here. And on the back of the wing saddle, looking down, I'm going to say the center of that is exactly 15/16. That's where I need to be. So I'm taking my ruler, I'm going to put my mark right on the center line at 3/4. Now, you may or may not be able to see it with the camera, but this hard piece of 1/8 inch plywood that we put underneath here is just right directly beneath this. Now, after the phone call here, just going to measure off the back. Make sure that I'm right at the 15/16 mark that I had. Now, got the holes marked. Again, visually what I want to do is I just want to, I'm going to be going over to the drill press and drilling a hole. I want to drill these so that they're the exact angle or very, very close to the angle that the bolt's going to go into the mounting block. I know on the front bolt here I'm going to be drilling it at probably about 10 degrees and the rear probably only about 4 or 5 degrees to match the contour of the top of the airfoil. So off to the drill press. Now that the wing's mounted, I'm going to go ahead and set the tail on and go ahead and mark around the tail and get the front strake of the tail countersunk down into the body. So, you know, the P-51 didn't have a bump here, so we need to countersink this down. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, I don't have the back put together, but I'm going to pinch it together, holding it with my fingers to make sure that it's lined up, and then lining this up to the center line of the body. Once it's there, just hold it tight, and we're going to just take the pin and put an outline mark on it. Okay, now that's the mark right there. Going to cut out. Looking here, I could see that this here, well, I know that my piece of balsa is a 1/4 inch thick, and so I need to just take that down from a 1/4 inch up, and it's going to be countersunk in. Okay, once that's punched out, go ahead. Remember, be gentle. Don't want to hurt any of that scrap foam coming out. And we should be able at this point get this fit down in here and see if it's exactly on. Looking here, I can see it doesn't quite touch the back here, so I can kind of look down in there and see there's a couple cells still in the way. Pull these out. Try it again. Okay. It's almost there. What I'm looking at here, and this is something that may occur, when I glued this in, I glued this in about probably a 1/16 of an inch shy, and what it's doing is it's butting up against here. I'm going to go ahead and just take that little bit off that it's missing, and just kind of make some small minute adjustments, taking into account the oops factor. Now, everything hits, touches, and fits. This at the moment sitting level. It's going to probably be pretty close in incidence to the wing, but now we're going to go ahead and get the plane propped up, get an incidence meter on the wing, and get this tail leveled to it. Okay, now it's time to go ahead and get our incidence done and get our tail mounted. Right now the tail still hasn't been attached to the airplane. There's two things we're going to be doing. We're going to be putting an incidence meter here on the wing, and then we're going to be leveling out the bed here for the tail to make sure that it's perfectly level in the same plane as the main wing. So here in a second we're going to come over, we're going to show a camera angle down, how we're going to attach the elevator control link right down inside of, into the linkage inside. At that point we're just going to set it back down and get everything hooked up to make it level. I've left everything earlier. I said I didn't glue this up for a reason. I want this to be kind of like a little flap I can get into. Also at this point I have my radio on, so that way my rod coming out is rigid and it'll resist me doing any movement to it. And so here we go. I'm just going to hook it up. What I'm going to do is need some small pliers. And this is kind of tight, but it's the best way I've found to do it. Try to get it so we can see. Then we're going to let our brass fall down in between our clevis and get the screwdriver out of the way and get this control horn popped on. Then I use a little pair of needle nose pliers here to make sure it gets locked into place. Right now it's just pushed through, it hasn't locked onto itself. And there, it's on. Okay, now we've hooked up the control links. I'm going to take the tail, I'm going to pull it over just to the side here so I can get in. What I need to do now is go ahead and finish gluing up the back. I'm going to get some hot glue down here, same way I did the rest of the fuse. I'm just going to get some hot glue, being careful, especially right up here on top, not to get too much, just a small bead, get it locked together, and then finish gluing up and around the back. I want to make sure I don't get any down here into the control links area. Any that squishes out right now, it's important that I get it off. Obviously that's where the tail is going to be sitting on. It needs to be flat and clean. Just hold this for a second. Make sure any excess that is coming back off is gone. And I'm just going to go ahead and work my way around the back and the bottom, putting a bead around the outside edge. What I like to do, I just have an old box that I just have around, works really well. It's a nice solid platform that I'm going to use to set the plane down on. I'm going to come around here and do a couple things. First of all, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and put the incidence meter on the wing. I like to bring the wing or the plane out to just about within about an inch of the edge of the box. Go ahead and set the meter down on it. Make sure your bar is running parallel with the center line of the plane. And just go ahead and get this in place and tighten down. Okay, first of all, what I want to do is I want to level the wing off. And what I'm going to do, I can see on the bubble here that I'm just a little bit out of bubble. I just have some scrap pieces of aileron stock that I use. And I'm going to go ahead and just use it to shim underneath the box until I bring it up to just dead center bubble. Which on the incidence meter right now, it's exactly at perfect. Also, I want to level a plane from tip to tip. I know that when I cut the saddle out, it's cut out in a square, and the bandsaw is perfectly level as I do that. So I just want to get this up here on a flat spot. And I'm going to do the same thing to the box this way to go ahead and get it exactly where I want it to be. And I'm just on level there. Make sure this stayed where it needs to be. It's just dead on. Now, the goal at this point is we're going to match the tail to the wing. That way everything is in the same exact plane and level. So, go ahead and get a meter on here, or a torpedo level on this. And right now, without any adjusting at all, the plane, the incidence on the airplane, with this being exact center bubble, just the tip of the bubble is touching the front. That means I'm going to have to raise up the back. Probably, and in this case, this is not even a sanding issue or a shimming issue. This is a matter of I'm just going to put a little bit more glue in the back, squish it down, and it's going to pretty well fall right into place. I'm just going to check side to side to see. And it wants to sit just, again, this is probably just a glue issue. I'm just about touching the line out of square on the tail itself. Also, note that this plane is designed to have zero angle of incidence between the wing and the tail. If you're positive or negative, even a half a degree, you're going to affect flight performance. You want this to be just exactly in the same plane. So I'm going to go ahead and get the glue gun here and get it glued up. As I do this also, I'm going to have the torpedo level here on the wing, checking the incidence of the airplane as I do it. I'm also going to go right down the back of the airplane. I'm going to be looking at the low point of this wing as to the high point of this to make sure that as I get it set down and glued down, that it's not going to be twisted in any way at all. I want it to be just exactly straight. So here we go. Still loose. Actually, I'm going to turn the airplane off. That way I can move the servo and give me just a little bit of play here, just to set it off to the side. Get my hot glue gun. Since this is all going into place at one time, I'm just going to fill this with a fairly good amount of hot glue to make sure the front of the stab is done. And then the wing bed here, I'm going to fill, making sure I don't get right up to the edge so I don't affect my linkage. Small bead around the outside edge and then the back. Then I'm going to put some down where the rudder is going to go. I'll go ahead and get it dropped down and in place. Get it squished in there real quick. Get my level on it. I'm not worried at this point about glue squishing anywhere or going off at all. If it does, I can wipe this up later without any problem at all. And I'm exactly on, at the moment, that direction. And my tail, putting it on this side, is with that little tweak right there, exact. It's exactly pointing front and straight. There's no twist in it at all. It's dead on. At this point now, I'm going to go ahead and wipe off that extra glue. Take that off. Get it off my fingers, let it set for just a second again. It's being that the hot glue is going to be really close to setting up here in a second. I'm just going to observe it, make sure nothing wants to fall or droop. Again, I'm just going to set this on the tail again and check that it's exactly perfect. Looks like the plane shifted a little bit. but it's still right on. And what I'm looking at, and you can't see it in the camera, but I'm seeing these 2 points right here of the elevator are matching about this point in my visual range of the front of the wing. And I'm just seeing that when I look up and down that they're touching the wing at the exact same time. Again, this is centered on the fuselage. Everything's good. And that's about it. Everything seems to be dry. All I'm going to do at this point is come back, do a little bit of extra gluing. It's set the way it's going to want to be. I'm going to take the glue gun, same way as I did when I mounted the spar, sticking it down inside the foam a little bit. And I'm going to create a small little fillet up here. Also put a little bit of extra glue right here where the balsa meets the foam. Wipe this off, extra. And then on the bottom and the back of the tail, I'm going to go ahead and put a bead across the back and blend that in and give me just a nice hot glue fillet along the bottom edge. And that's going to be that little bit of extra bite that helps your tail in case you get a hard landing. Come back over to where I started. Wipe it off. Get it off my fingers, and again, just out of redundancy, I'm going to check one more time. And it is, that level is in the exact same spot as that. Again, you can never check your incidents over too many times. When it comes down to the flight performance of the airplane, this probably has the single most effect of anything. I could have put this tail on, or the wing, an inch forward on the left side, and this tail a half an inch forward on the right side. As long as this vertical was then straight and the incidence is on, it'll look funny when it flies, but it would fly, and it probably wouldn't affect the performance too much as long as everything else is straight. And we're done. The tail is now mounted. We're going to go on now. I'm going to do the final fitting of the canopy here in a second. And at this point, we're going to then spackle the fuse. Next, I'm going to go ahead and cut out the clear canopy. This, I made this plug, and what I did when I did it, I put a recess, so that way if you're cutting it out, you can see exactly where it needs to go. If you were ordering a pre-shaped fuselage from me, it's going to come already fitted to the airplane. Tools required to do this, pretty simple. Couple pair of scissors. I have some medical scissors I picked up from a supply store, and then some smaller, finer ones here that work pretty well. We're going to rough cut it out, and then I'll be trimming up the edges with like some 100 grit sandpaper and a sanding block. So the whole thing I'm going to be doing here is just getting the rough off and then finishing it up with the more detailed scissors, making sure not to obviously take off anything that's good at the moment. One little tip too also, be careful not to drag your fingers or anything across this plastic as you're cutting it. It's kind of deceptive, but it'll make your hand really red really quick. So just be careful about that. Don't need that, and I don't know if it shows up in the camera all that well or not, but it's a very definitive line about where we're going to cut out. I'm going to go ahead and switch to my smaller scissors that are more precise. I find it a lot easier to cut looking down at a line of sight because usually the light will reflect and I can see that line really clear. And I'm going to try to cut it as close to the line as possible, not going into the top of the canopy part at all. Again, it's a lot easier just to take some sandpaper or a bench-mounted belt sander or something and clean it up. As I'm cutting this out, I can't quite figure out why the guy behind the camera keeps making faces at me. So I'm not understanding that. But I think he's trying to make me crack under pressure. Crack like an egg. Yeah, if any of you guys watching this have ever followed RC groups at all, you'd have seen I documented the process of making this plug. So it's kind of neat to see it all come out and get the finished product. It's pretty satisfying actually to get something you've done out like this and see how it really finishes off your model. So there it is, roughed out. Not bad for my first time, hopefully. And I'm going to go ahead and sand this now and get it finished off of the plane. Real quick though, just going to see how it roughly fits on here. I know normally the very tip of the canopy sat just behind the wing saddle, just a little bit, so somewhere in there, and that's kind of where we're looking at right now. Looks like a good fit. Just needs to have the edges cleaned up, and we'll be ready to go to the next step. Wax on, wax off, wax on. Now we're going to go ahead and mount the wing servo. On the majority of the PSS planes that I build, I use just a single servo. I don't find it to have a huge benefit for flaps or spoilers. They do work if you have a landing zone that you really need to have some type of flap or spoiler to get down. Using two servos, mounting them here in the center, and having a computer radio to mix them can be a benefit. But like I said, for my own personal stuff, I find that having just a single servo works really well. And cuts down on weight also. So what I'm going to do, I've got my Hi-Tech 325 HB. First thing I'm going to do is wipe it down with an alcohol prep wipe, because I will be gluing it in place. So I'll wipe this down, get the mold release off it, and that way just set it aside for a second, let it dry. What we're going to need for the rest of this, we have our two push rods. I already kind of knocked part of them off down to length. Right here, these are the torque rod clevises here. What these do is these are just going to screw down onto the 440 rod. And what you want to do, you're going to want to screw these down probably about halfway on this rod. Got to get it started here. What we're trying to do here, I like to dial in the most throw I can on my ailerons. I like to have, probably almost 40, 45 degree angle deflection, which is way overkill. But sometimes I like to have it just to do screw around aerobatics and stuff. But for normal flight, you don't need it. And you're going to achieve more throw on your torque rod, bringing your angle down, and then using a bigger horn on your servo. Get the other side done here. These look to be screwed down to about the same height. Okay, now what I'm going to do, I'm going to get my servo. I know that my spar on this wing here is crossing over right about here. I'm going to put the servo behind the spar. If you're really concerned about weight, you can squeeze it up sideways here, up in front of it. If you're doing a non-removable wing, there's a lot more room. You don't have to worry about the hole in the bolt going through. You can put it up front, facing forward. But what I do here, I'm going to go ahead and set the servo down in place, down in the center of the wing. Take my pin and trace it out. Once I have it traced out, I just kind of eyeball it to make sure that it's centered. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and cut the hole out. I'm going to go ahead and, once we cut it out, I'm going to pull out the foam all the way down to where the glass is on the bottom of the wing. It's going to take just a second. You got to kind of work it because we're cutting through the glass. But bring this blade down just a bit. Just be careful as you're doing it. Usually you'll cut through the glass fairly easy, just with a couple nice, pulls through. Okay, now that's all cut through. Let's use some needle nose pliers, get down in here and grab it. Off it comes. Got the exposed foam. I'm going to cut a small little notch here for my servo wire to come back out of. And just turn this a little bit so you guys can see. I just cut a V-notch in it. Use the pressure of the knife. It doesn't need to be perfectly square. It just needs to be where it won't cut the wires coming out. Okay, now the foam that's here is going to go ahead and come on out. Servo now should just slide right down in, which it does. Where's a way of illustrating this? This here, right now, probably going to see on this camera, if I go at a 90-degree angle off this servo, my wire is just too high. It's not going to line up. That's going to cause it to bind. What I need to do is I need to angle this servo so that it points directly down at these horns. I want just a completely bind-free linkage system, so I'm going to need to bring it up, and I can actually just see here on the side. I need to angle this probably 3/16 of an inch to 0 from one side of the servo to the next to come straight down on it. So what I do here, I just take the wing bed that I had earlier, and all I'm going to do is just cut a simple shim on it, glue it to the bottom of the servo, stick it in, and it's going to line it up perfectly. So the way you do that, just go ahead and take it about the width of the servo, thereabouts. Just go ahead and cut a piece about the length of the servo also. Lay it on its side, and on the flat part, take your blade and come out and go about the 3/16 of an inch to 0 and just work it down and cut a nice little wedge. And that's all we're after right there, is some type of wedge. We're going to glue this on the bottom of the servo, and that's going to, when it sits flat on that glass on the bottom, it's going to bring it at the right angle. To attach this, we use this high-tech piece of machinery right here. And it's down and on. So what we'll be doing now is go ahead and glue the wing and servo in place. What I like to do, I like to leave nothing to chance about this servo coming out. I'm going to use a pretty generous amount of hot glue again. You might notice throughout the whole build I like hot glue. Don't have a hot glue fetish, but it works really well because I don't want to wait for stuff to dry. If you needed to or wanted to, goop here works just as well. The only difference is you're going to wait overnight for your cure time. If you weren't in a hurry, it's just fine too. I'm going to test fit it real quick down in here and hold my wire up and just see where it's going to come out. And yeah, it's pretty well dead on at the angle I want. So I know it's good. It's nice and solid. I'm going to take my hot glue gun. I'm going to lay right around the top edge. I'm going to lay a thick bead all the way around, and then I'm going to lay some on the bottom. So that way, as I press the servo down in, it's going to be pressing through this beaded layer that I put up around the edge, and then squish it out again. Again, if you get some squish out, that's good. It means it's full of glue. And then I'm going to come back around the outside edge, and I'm going to put a bead of glue around the outside of the servo on top of the tape to hold it in place. And drizzle a generous amount on the bottom. And take the servo and work it down in. Make sure you're getting it nice and tight and squished in there. Once it's down in, put a good bead around the top. I like to use the nozzle to kind of work it and spread it around. I want to have a lot of surface area holding it down in place. So all I'm doing is just using that nozzle. So if it looks a little messy, I mean, if you want to clean it up, that's fine. I don't mind what this looks like here for the simple fact you're never going to see this when it's mounted on the plane, and it's going to give me the performance and function that I want. And to me, that's more important than aesthetics in this case. I'm worried about what the outside of the plane is going to look like, not the inside. I'm going to give that just a couple seconds to sit up. I don't want this to move until that glue. There's enough glue there. I'm going to let it sit about a minute to cool down. Then I'm going to go ahead and get the linkage made, attach it, and the wing servo will be done. Okay, the glue's set up. Now we're going to go ahead and get our control rods hooked onto it. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and take these are all Dubrow parts here. Go ahead and take the control clevis, get it screwed on. What I like to do is I like to take it through about 1/4 of an inch. That way if I have to back it off a little bit or in a little bit, I'm not going to bind. So what I do then, I like to pinch it down. That way the actual tab that's going to hold into the horn is sticking through. I don't have to actually put it on. I just pop it down into place. I take a Sharpie marker. What I'm going to do is just eyeball down, put a mark right where the hole is, where I'm going to have to make my 90-degree bend to hook it up. Take it off. Use a good set of pliers that you can hold on to pretty well with. Grab right at the spot. Just give a 90-degree bend. Cut it off at about 1/4 inch. This here is going to come through. See it on, I'm sure, over here. Then I had these little Dubrow keepers. They work great. They're what they do is they go on and then just snap onto the wire itself, and they're on. I've crashed pretty hard a couple times, and I've never had one of these fail. The one thing that you're going to see, and this is kind of good that it didn't line up the first time, this doesn't want to come over bind free. It's got its own little zone that it'll move. What I have to do is I just have to take the wire and give it just a little bit more bend, and then it's going to line up perfect, so it's completely binding free. Now you can see it comes right into place. So all we do is we bring this back up here, so this is level with the trailing edge. Screw this down, not a little bit too far. Check it out, nice and level. Go ahead and use my little pliers here to open it up. And we just got to get it spread out enough to get it over the control horn. Snaps in place. There you go. Now I'll just do the same to the other side. We'll be done. There we go. The hole slides on the end. Pop it in. And you see here, all it does is snap onto the wire itself. Okay, now I've completed both sides. One thing I went back and did, I didn't show earlier, is I put the keepers on to go ahead and make sure that these control horns don't want to pop off. So it's all done, everything's set, neutralized. Just to show you here the bind-free movement that we're going to get. So we're going to get, theoretically, I don't know, and I know this will throw it, but we're going to get about an inch and 5/8 throw on the top, and we'll probably get somewhere right around an inch on the bottom. When I build my torque rods, I put mechanical differential in it, so it's going to have it already. That's why you can use a single servo effectively. But this wing now is done and ready for covering. I'm going to show one more thing here real quick. The control horn, I had centered everything out here, but just because of the number of steps of teeth on the control horn, you know, this is as close as lined up as it'd be once everything was plugged in. Obviously, it's just a matter of a couple clicks of trim. Everything will be set right down the middle. And then also, I just want to show you how much throw we're actually going to be able to get when everything's bind free and clean. So this should have a fairly decent roll rate. Actually, it's probably got enough roll rate that it'll stop, which is really kind of fun. I always believe in putting in more than you ever need. That's what dual rates are for in computer radios. And also, for regular flying, you're probably going to want to use some exponential on this. Help tone it down in the middle, because this thing here is going to snap. So, it's pretty cool. Now that the wing's all mounted up, we're going to go ahead and put the bottom scoop for the P51 on. Being that this is a removable wing, what we're going to do is cut a hole out for the bolt to go in and out. This is going to be permanently mounted on the wing itself, so there'll just be a small hole here for it to come through. I'm going to go ahead and place it on down. What I did already, I just put a small hole here due to the fact that I couldn't get it to sit flush. I'm going to get it just to make sure everything looks right. What you probably have to do to get it to sit well is sand down the center and put a small concave surface on it to match the dihedral. I'm just going to do that really quick with some 80 grit sandpaper. And then same thing like when I mounted the wing bolts earlier. I'm gonna go ahead and measure over and get an approximate measurement where I need to make the hole on this for that bolt to go through. So on this one it needs to be just at 1.5 inches. So I'm just going to take my marker, put a dot at 1.5 inches in the center, and take my razor knife and very carefully here try to cut a nice perfect hole. It's pretty not super critical that it's perfect, but you know, this is something that shows, so you know, you want it to be very, very close. It needs to be a little oversized of what the bolt head is. These are 1/4 bolts. We'll go ahead and get that out. And then once you can see it, get your blade through there and just clean it up real nice. This here, the back and forth action. I'm actually bending the blade also a little bit like I did on when I cut out the slots for the spars. Just get a nice hole cut in there. Go ahead and stick it over and test it out. And it's right over the top. We're good. What I'm going to go ahead and do now is glue this down on and then line it up. I'm going to just use hot glue. What I'm going to do first, I'm going to use an alcohol prep wipe. I'm going to take the mold release off the tape here. That way I get good adhesion with the hot glue. It's not going to want to come off. That dries almost instantaneously. Go ahead and set this back down on. Get it lined up, and I'm going to go ahead and trace it out. That way I know where to lay a bead of hot glue. Now, just as a note, nothing's going to touch back here. No hot glue in that area. This obviously is going to come off with the wing itself. I'm going to lay this down in a squiggly pattern all the way around. And then I'm going to go right around the outside edge real quick. Get it pressed down in place right where I made my marks. Hold it down tight. Double check it for being straight and square. And then I'm going to go around the outside edge like I did on everything else with a bead of hot glue. Then once this is on, what I'm going to do, I'm going to use my sandpaper, and if there's any angle here that's not perfectly straight and square just because of the possible deviation of the wing, I'm going to go ahead and sand that to the correct shape now, bring it in, and we're going to go from there. All right, time to spackle the fuse. Being that this is a removable wing, the P51 had a very small fillet. I'm not going to go ahead and put any EPP and build it up here. It was just very small. I'm going to go ahead and seal up all the way up to the wing so we'll have a nice tight fit here as for finishing. So what I did in advance, I took a little bit of just regular clear box packing tape. This is just the Scotch stuff. It's not very sticky. I didn't spray 3M over the top of this other tape yet. So I just laid that in underneath the wing itself, took the body off, put it in there, so that way I'm going to go ahead and spackle and create a fillet right down onto the wing, and then when it dries it'll just pop right off that, it won't stick to it at all, and we'll go from there. Some of the things I'm going to be doing, filling in, you can see here where there's the gap. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to be putting spackle in here to fill that up a little onto the stabs to create a nice smooth place to flow air. Also back here, instead of just having it come straight down, I'm going to go ahead and fill this in. So it's all going to be blended, one nice particular thing. Any place up here like where there's a little bit of glue, that dropped in as it dried out, it's going to go there all the way around, all the way up. The only thing I have to do other than that tape that I've already done is prep where I've got my switch. I'm just going to take a small piece of masking tape and put right over it, and right over where the charging jack is. And that's all I'm doing right there. Okay, doing the spackling. Again, don't be afraid of doing it. Grab it, push it into the cells. If it spills out on the table, big deal. You just pick it up as you go, put it right back on the airplane. Okay, gonna make the fillet. Just take a fair amount here. Lay it down in, pushing it in pretty well. I'm just going to use my thumb in this case. Just come up against the side and build it up here in the back. And rub it in place just like that. That there, when we're done, it's going to pop right off the tape. And it's going to give us a clean line. You're not going to see any gaps between the fuse and the wing when we're done. Okay, as we're coming to the tail, I'm going to take the spackle. Same kind of thing right here where it comes underneath the wing. I'm just going to push it in, put a nice cord around with my finger, let it dry. Any extra, I'm just going to knock it off. Here's the thing, when we come to the back end here, we want to just go ahead and lay it onto the balsa. Push it in to the balsa pretty good. It doesn't want to stick until you've got it wet, kind of. You want to push it in real nice. Get a lot on there for a moment. We're going to take some of it off. At this point, this is where I will use I'll use a scrap piece of balsa that I've got, kind of as a straight edge to pull it off, so I know I've got a nice even layer of spackle on it. Get a little extra. Okay, I've just got an extra piece of aileron stock here, and all I'm going to do is just make sure that from the back edge of the foam all the way up, I've got enough spackle on there. So, okay, that's what I'm going to do for it right there at the moment. I'm going to flip it over. Same thing up here on top. I'm going to go ahead and take it, squish it down in there pretty good, smear it in. It gets kind of messy, and that's okay. Sandpaper is going to take it all off. We're going to wipe it down, and once it's covered, the only thing it's going to do is make it really smooth. That's where we're going to begin to get that glass-like look and performance out of it, because you're not going to have, you know, anything creating drag. It's going to be as smooth as anything you can do. Right here, I'm going to push the elevators down carefully. I'm going to fill in these small gaps here, and just going to rub that up onto here so I can get a smooth transition. And if people think I'm going a little bit overboard on spackle, at least it's not tape. I think I was branded with that early. And that's about it. I'm just going to touch here on these fillets where I touched it earlier. Get it back. We kind of look like a big frosted, stuccoed something piece of yuck. But by the end of the day, when this dries and it's sanded off, it's going to be a perfectly smooth P51 Mustang. Oh yeah, and while it's drying, we're going flying. Hello. I love that. Now the covering of the wing. Talk to you just for a second about what we're going to do. I cover all of my foam planes in Solartex. I do it for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's by far the easiest material to use over foam. It's designed to be used at low temperature, and its ideal application temperature is lower than the melting temperature of the foam. So you can put it on the way it's supposed to be done, not worry about hurting what's underneath and destroying your work. Secondly, it's a polyester type of cloth. If you're flying in rough areas and you get a tear, it's not completely ripstop, but it does resist tearing. It will not want to progress, basically. And then another thing I like about it, it's very similar to Monocoat in the sense that when you stick it onto itself, it doesn't want to delaminate if done properly, if you've done it at the right temperature. If it's done low, of course, it won't stick to itself, but you get it up at the proper place and it works really well. And the other thing is, this stuff here will bend in shape and conform pretty much to do anything you want with very little or no relief cuts. So you'll get a very clean surface that you're working with. So, all right, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and prep the surface. The tape has a mold release on the back, and we want to go ahead and get that mold release off. That way, when we put this on, this is self-adhesive, but you know, we want to go ahead and make sure that anything on there that's going to keep it from being non-stick is taken off. I use acetone, and just works really quickly. You don't have to do a whole lot, but you do have to wipe the whole thing down. Hey, I don't know if you guys can see this or not, but even just from this sitting around a couple of hours while we've been doing stuff, the acetone has taken off some other dirt and stuff, other residue that's come on, and the other mold release. So now it's really smooth and slick. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to put just a light mist of 7-7 spray adhesive on. The reason I'm doing the 7-7 spray adhesive is not to get the covering to stick better for final application. Like I said earlier, the covering's got its own adhesion. It's going to stick to the material fine. What I'm going to do with the 7-7 is that light mist is going to allow the Solartex to kind of work almost like a Post-it note would, where it's going to allow me to position it over the wing and work it without it sliding around and moving while I work it. That's pretty much the whole reason it's there. We found out in the past that using too much of it will want to make the Solartex bubble, and you get a lot better finish not using the 7-7. A lot of it, just like I said, just that mist is pretty much all we need. So get that done. It's kind of exactly opposite of what we do underneath the tape. I'm just going to go right here around the servo. I don't want to get any on it. And that's it. Now this isn't going to need a lot of dry time, just due to the fact that there's really not a lot on there. A lot of it's evaporating as soon as it touches, but we'll give it just a second and then start laying it down. All right, now our Super 7-7 is dry. We're going to go ahead and get ready to start covering this. What you're going to do here, you're going to just take the Solartex and roll it out. We're going to roll it out just to probably about 3 inches over the edge and 1 inch over center line. Cut it down off. So about there. Taking special note not to cut our servo wire that may be underneath there. Okay, that's done. Now, just talk to you just a second here about the type of Solartex I prefer to use also. I cover every one of my planes in olive drab Solartex. I do that for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's a lot easier to cover it in one color, because I'm not worried about trimming it and doing color schemes. I'm going to do that when I paint. And then second of all, I find that personally I like the way the olive drab works. It seems to bend and stretch the best and stick to itself better than others. It's just a personal preference. Some guys, prefer silver, which does work pretty good. But I just prefer to use this and paint it silver if I want a silver scheme. So, okay. I'm going to go ahead and get this laid out here and just do the rough cut, and then we're going to go ahead and switch camera angles, and I'm going to show you how I do this. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get the rough outline. I'm going to hang this over about 1 inch or so at the strake, and then maybe 1.5 inches or so over the leading edge. The whole reason, I'm going to waste a little bit of this material. But as I'm taking it and bending it down around, I need something for my fingers to hold on to. If it's too small, you're going to be getting too close to your heat source and burn yourself. You're not going to be able to do the job well. So you can see right here, this is the reason I sprayed it with 7-7, is this reason. It's holding it, but it'll come off real nice and easy. I can kind of get it quickly positioned. I can see here to the back where my trailing edge is. I'm going to go ahead and cut this about 1/2 inch or so beyond the trailing edge. Using that in a minute. Okay. Another important thing about Solartex, important thing about pretty much every color covering out there, At this point, take the backing off. This doesn't stick so well. I haven't yet to do it, but I've seen other people do it. And you get so far and you can't figure out why it won't stick, check to see if you took the backing off. So get it laid back down on here. At this point, this is what I like to do. All I'm doing is just smoothing it out with my hand first. Going that, well, actually this is just a little bit over centered more than I wanted. I want a little bit more on the outside edge so I can hold on to it easier. But it's just that easy to reposition. Just pull it up and smooth it out. Push any of the air bubbles out that are in it right now. And the rest are going to come out as we iron. You see how these, I don't know if we can see in either one of these shots, we can see it probably over here to the left, where there's these air bubbles in. Just take it, pick it up, and relay it back down. And we're going to get nice and smooth. I still have an inch or so I can pull this down, keep my fingers out of the way of the heat source. Plenty of room around the back side to do that. And what I'm going to do right now is bring it up here where my servo's at. Just going to use my razor knife. I'm going to put a relief cut because we can't bend this around. And I'm going to just put a small little cut here where it's going to lay around the servo. And I'm actually just going to cut the Solartex out at this point. Come from the back here, start my cut. And then I'm going to cut a small little notch right here around where my torque rod comes out. And I'm going to do that with the scissors because I just want a small little notch. No, not going to use these ones for that. Now, this stuff up here, you know, as I'm kind of just rough cutting these notches out, they're not going to show. They're going to be underneath the wing when it's bolted on. So if they're not perfect, again, this part really doesn't matter. We just want them to be stuck down really well. Take off that excess there. And then right here, I'm just going to use my razor knife and trim the Solartex right up against the servo. Just take this part off right there. Okay, so now my Solartex is laying down all the way across the wing. And I'm going to go ahead and get this ready to start laying the iron on. The iron, again, I'm using the 21st Century Cover-Ride iron. The temperature that we want to apply the Solartex down at is approximately 240 degrees Fahrenheit. I like this iron just for the simple fact I can dial the temperature. When it's blinking, it tells me it's within 3 degrees of that. So what we want to do now, since we've got everything already hooked up, I want to make sure that my aileron is completely free from movement. I want to pull it towards the end of the table. And I want to make sure this aileron is all the way down and nothing is stuck to it at all. So I want to be able, as I do this, I'm going to want to have it completely free. So as long as this aileron's up, I know that that one's down, it's out of the way. I also like to hang the tip of my wing over about 6 or 7 inches. Okay, now let's get the iron on it. Starting in the center, push down with a fair amount of pressure, work the iron out from the center towards the center and then towards the tips. The key here is no air bubbles and no wrinkles. Wrinkle, all a wrinkle does is compromise strength. Air bubble, all that does is the same thing, plus they look bad. So pressing down with a fair amount of pressure will allow it to go ahead and really stick well. Plus, if you have air bubbles, you're going to hear them pop. This does work similar to other coverings. If you do have an air bubble, you can sometimes pop them with a pin, let the air escape, and then they'll lay down nice. Okay, coming here, this is one of the reasons I want my aileron down. I put my thumb underneath. Okay, once my thumb's underneath, I bring it up just to find out where the trailing edge is. And I'm going to work this down, and I'm going to seal the trailing edge right here. And I'm going to then come across this part of the wing, then work it back. And what I want to do is put a nice sharp edge where the trailing edge is going to drop off onto the aileron. Saying earlier, I want a nice clean line on this trailing edge on the balsa, outlining exactly where my aileron is going to be. You see it here. It's stuck all the way nice, and I've got a clean, crisp line all the way across. Then what I want to do is pull this up, make sure that the aileron is not touching at all, that it's completely free of it. I'm going to get my razor knife, and right on this line, I want to plunge my razor knife down and carefully go in and then out, right on the line, taking this up exactly till it hits the balsa, just to that point. Now, from here, what you're going to want to do, you want to take your iron, instead of using the front end of the shoe, you want to flip it over. Depending on the iron you have, almost every one of them has some type of a flat spot, like up here on the top. But you want to flip it over, and this flat spot here is going to go, and I just show you on this side of the wing here, it's going to go on the back side of the right here. And we're going to flip it in and roll it all the way down in and then around. So, coming back over, I start in the middle. I pull tight a little tension just to make sure it's nice and stuck, let it go, and then let it come in and form onto the back of the trailing edge stock here. So I work from the center out. Doesn't matter if you work to the inside or to the outside first. You just want to work from the center out. As long as you have this stuck down to this top edge first, you won't get any kinking or binding all the way across. It'll just go clean the entire way. So you can see just that quick and easy, it's set. But I'm going to go back and I want to make sure that is completely set. And I'm just going to visually watch that hit every part of that trailing edge. Okay, that's good. It's still completely free at this point. You see here, it's free of it. I want to pull some pressure on at this point. Not too much, but I want to hold it pretty much tight down onto it. Flipping the iron back over, I want to put it on that 45-degree bevel, pulling it down as I go, and setting it into place. Now right here, it's going to be hard to see in the light, but I'm going to try to turn it here. You can actually see where I'm rolling it over where the torque rod is. So, and I'm sealing every last little bit there to try to make sure that nothing is going to ever pull up on this wing. So, set this all the way down. Okay, now once that's on, I want a nice clean edge on my 45-degree bevel. Okay, got a nice clean edge of my 45-degree bevel. Start from the center, pull down with a little tension, and the aileron down. Set it. pull it tight, push the bubble out, set it. We're going to chase every wrinkle off the wing. Going from the center out, then the center in. It doesn't matter if I go in or out, either way. We're going to chase them off. What you want, and one way you're going to chase them off is pulling the iron towards the direction you want them to come away. So, what I do, you see, I pull my finger and then get it back away. It's because the iron's 240 degrees and it's hot. So one of my good friends tells me every time I happen to touch it, fire's hot. I just want to yell at him and say something, but then I realize that, dang, fire's hot. So I get this set. Now that's set off. I want a clean line on the back edge here. Everything is just a series of pull and set. I can actually, at this point, this is already set. I can go ahead and bring it up, make it a little bit easier to work with. We're going to cut right here in the center of the joint. So I'm going to just make a small cut and come out. And at this point, everything I'll be able to go in two separate pieces here. I know that I'm going to have to set this little tiny triangular piece that's right here. It's going to be hard for the camera to see. Some of this stuff gets really small, but I'm going to go ahead and just take here. I'm going to go from like a small angle up to this corner point and just make a cut right there, and that way it's just to the corner. Come underneath, pulling everything else away. Just going to come and set that down, and now this will be free to go ahead and roll everything over. This is where I start using the heat gun, and I'm going to speak up a little bit so you guys can hopefully hear over this what we're going to do. It doesn't really matter where you start because you're going to kind of work it back and forth a little bit. Go ahead and pull some pressure down on it, heat it for a second, heat off and away. Hold it, heat it for a second, heat off and away. Pull down, heat it, heat off and away. The thing is, you don't want to heat it very long, just till you begin to see a reaction. It'll keep reacting even when the heat's away. Heat on, heat's off and away. Hold it. And that's about where I'm going to take it to. I'm going to go ahead and seal up these other sides. I'll be trimming this off when I flip it over. Okay, on the corner here, I'm going to go ahead and place a cut at a 45-degree angle off the corner. I'm going to roll this on and trim this up on the back of the aileron. Right to the tip. Taking this, I can do this part here without a relief cut because of the angle of the aileron. It's not sharp. It'll allow it to take the entire curve and bend. Go ahead and keep your heat on it. Roll it over. Once it's rolled over, keeping this out of the way, go ahead and trim it. We want to have when we trim this off, I'll show you here, we want to leave about 1/4 of an inch, thereabout, on the aileron here itself, and also all the way around. And the reason for that, when we cover the bottom, we don't have to roll over on the ailerons over the top. We're just going to come right to the edge and trim it. We will roll over the edge of the wing just for extra protection though on there. So I can trim this part here flat because this is going to cover it up as I come over. And then I need to trim just a little spot. I also don't want a lot of excess covering in my joint. I want to go ahead and I don't want to have anything that has a possibility of binding my aileron movement. So I'm going to go ahead and just nip this piece out of the center here. And that's going to go ahead and allow it not to roll into the joint. Pulling tight, holding against the trailing edge. Just really set that trailing edge nice. Go ahead and roll it over and just set it just lightly on the actual bottom of the aileron. I'm going to trim that off about 1/4 inch. Okay, get rid of that. I'm also going to trim this so it's even with the edge of the aileron. Just go ahead and finish bringing this up nice and flat. Okay. I'm noticing here that on this strake I am going to want to make a relief cut. I don't want to take the chance of having this pull off, and I'm a lot better off putting a relief cut in and putting a second piece over just to fill that gap than I am trying to bend it off. It'll allow it to stick better in the long run. So looking here on top, I can see exactly the point where the strake hits. I'm going to go ahead and just take the razor knife, go ahead and put a cut there. And if you could see here, you can tell it's exactly at the point where the joints line up. Go ahead and come over to the edge of the table so I have room and just roll it over. And interesting. We just had a visit from a Kansas werewolf. They come out at night. Been known to eat small children and dogs, but we should be safe. Greg's wearing garlic. Right here, I'm going to go ahead and make a relief cut also. Depending on the angle, it's a lot better to put a cut and roll it over onto itself. It sticks to itself so well. You're better off doing that than even chance getting a wrinkle at all. Okay, that's on. I'm going to trim this here about 1/4 inch. Seal the edge real well. I'm going to go ahead and trim. On the back here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to trim this so that way my scissors are resting on top. One of the blades, as I open it up, will be sitting on the flat part of the wing itself. When I trim, that way I know I'm not going to cut too low. So that way, as I put my piece on the other side, I'll have a good overlap, and I'll have a good bond on the wing. But I also have enough room where I'm going to be able to take this without a single wrinkle on the wingtip. And then what I do here is as I come off the wingtip, I like to transition over into about 1/4 of an inch, and then take that down the wing itself. So, and here we're just going to finish sealing up the edges here. Secret to getting this nice is go ahead and let the heat work and shrink the Solartex as far as it's going to go. We're going to get this out. If you get these little, what you might see, there's tiny little wrinkles that show up at the beginning that as you work it are going to relax and take themselves all away. And we'll probably end up just using the heat gun just a second on them again too. Finish taking them out the rest of the way. And then we're looking good. Work it around the back of the scoop. This is going to be hard to see just due to the fact that it's hard to pull it around, but it's the same basic thing as what we did on the wingtip. Just going to work it. And stretch, and then hold as it relaxes. And we're going to duplicate this now on 3 other sides. Now, one of the things I'm going to be doing here, once we're all finished up, I'm going to need to go back and really work on every seam that there is. You're going to want to come back and just hit the iron on it, go over it quite a few times, and make sure it's completely down. You don't want it to lift later on. Some guys will drizzle thin CA on them, and that does work. I personally don't like to do that just because I don't like the way it looks, but it does work, so if it works for you, it's an option. And this, since this side's already done, there's no need to roll it over because we've already got 1/4 inch or so overlap up on top. So I just bring my scissors, I let them rest up against the edge of the stock here, and use it as my guide to come down and trim it off. Nice and straight and neat. My crease line, go ahead and cut it out. I'm going to seal this really well also, again. And I'm just going to be trimming around it. I don't need to roll that over. I'm going to roll this over partially like I did on the front or the top side. Trim it off and then get it sealed really well. I'm just going to carefully draw it across. Just putting enough pressure to cut through the first layer of Solartex, not all of them. Get that sealed. And then the same thing coming across the back. And due to the fact that this is kind of in my way, I'm just going to use a razor knife. Come from the other direction. And here's where I use the heat gun again. What I'm doing, it's going to be a matter of getting the heat on and heat off very quickly. Heat on, get it away, Hold it there for a couple seconds, let it cool. Pull down another spot, get some pressure, heat on, heat off. Okay, that's the way I want it on this. I don't need to take this nearly as far due to the fact that the first time I rolled that covering over to somewhere right in this area. So when I trim it, I'm still going to have a nice 1/4 inch or so. Okay, now we've rolled it over, we're ready to trim this off. I'm going to go ahead and just use my scissors here and work my way across. Yeah, it's always an angle game. How can you get your scissors in there to comfortably draw it across? It's real clean. Okay, now as I approach the edge here, I'm going to quit and start from the other direction and come across. That way I can see exactly where my where I've been rolling it over, so I could bring it exactly where it won't have any wrinkles. Right there, where I got that small little wrinkle, I'm going to chase these out real quick. I could still see they were there. I'm going to take them out. Okay. All right, got it trimmed. Now it's just a matter of bringing the iron back over here, finish sealing it off. All right, so here's the edge that we just created. Nice and clean. You know, we don't have to have any relief cuts. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and come back, and I'm just going to seal up all these edges, like here where it was trimmed. I'm going to go over the wing and make sure everything is pressed down nice and tight. And this wing here will be ready for paint. The spackle on the fuse is dry now. You can see there's some high spots, obviously, because of the way I just throw it on. I'm going to use 80 grit to start with, and very gently draw it over the high spots first. Very little pressure. The spackle is so easy to sand. You just want to almost let just the pressure of the paper do it, and just begin to get it back into shape. We've already obviously shaped it one time, and this is going to be bringing it back to the finish. I like to try to move it all the time again in a 45-degree angle or with the width of the paper, so I don't create a flat spot going back and forth. So I can do the nose here. Now, you might see this here. Spackle has a tendency to want to roll up on itself. When that happens, just brush it off, go back. If you hit too much in one single spot, it'll do that. Keep moving that paper around so you don't, so you don't create a flat spot. Got a couple high spots right here at the bottom. Carefully. Okay, I'm getting really close to, at this point, just knocking those spots off, where I'm going to switch over to 100 grit. I'm going to do this by hand from this point, and it takes a little while longer, but when you're doing it this way, there's a lot less chance of making an error. So it's the way I prefer to do it from here on. And again, we're going to sand down until we want it, we start hitting the fuzz, or even if we leave a little bit of spackle in a low spot, that's what it's exactly designed for. It's going to fill it in. We're going to get a much better finished model out of it. Also, don't be deceived if we do have a low spot in Like here, there's a small depression in the spackle, and if I close my eyes and just feel it, I can feel that that is a high spot and it's got to come off, even though it might appear that the spackle is a little low there. So a lot of this is just completely done by feel. It is kind of hard to contrast the white, but you know, it all comes together. Okay, on the nose cone. Nose cone again is something where I like to cup it and just gently work it in a circle. And when I'm doing it, I'm from this point on, I kind of flip it around and look at it from many different angles as I'm doing it. Do whatever's comfortable for you. The goal is obviously just getting it smooth and any gaps filled up. Okay, as I'm doing the nose, you can see I'm twisting the sandpaper to allow it to work. And I'm doing this very gently. You can go back and forth at this point as long as it's in a cone. You begin to get that cylindrical shape. Also on the P51, where it had that small, there's just that small indentation where it came under the nose cone. We're going to begin to define that here a little bit by using this. As we work ourselves around, you can't just let the paper go to 45. At this point, it's got to be holding the paper so it's square against the center line of the body. That way the nose cone looks like it's, you know, straight and square. But we're starting to get a definition line now between the nose cone, where the nose cone is, and the rest of the body. It really will begin to show itself once we paint the plane and the nose cone's painted. You'll see that definite line. Bring it down to meet. What I like to do on the scoop, I'm going to take the paper and I'm going to use the flat spot on the paper here. I'm just going to gently work it with the flat spot. I'm going to turn it this way here. And begin to work that where the scoop is. And it's kind of got that nice smiley look. Making sure I keep this paper flat. Once I got that just about there, I can see that I've still got a little bit of spackle to take off right at the edge. And at this point, if you wanted to, because we're getting to this final shaping point, you can refer back to the model or pictures that you've done. I've done a couple of these, so I'm pretty familiar with the shape, and I know this is just about where it's supposed to be. But you see here that the nose on this side is beginning to take shape. We have a definition line between our nose cone and the rest of our body, and it's pretty smooth, right down to the point where the spackle begins to have what we would call the fuzz, and that's fine. It covers all up. What I'm going to do now is move to the back and show you how back here where we filled up these areas to go ahead and, so where there was a blunt end where our tails met the body, we're going to go ahead and take these off and show you how to fill those in, or how they'll smooth out. I like to flip the plane upside down and pull the elevator up out of the way, and gently, and again, it's hard to stress how gentle you want to be with the 80 grit. There's almost no pressure involved in doing it, and I want to make sure I'm not touching the actual elevator at all. Other thing we want to do as you're doing a tail, you want to make sure you don't get into your balsa. The tip of your tail is the point that you're bringing everything else to match. So you want to be really careful on that. And just real gentle. Take these high spots off. Then we're going to go ahead and switch here in just a couple seconds to some lower grit paper, and then go by hand. That's getting really close to where I'm going to go ahead and quit here. I'm going to go ahead and go by hand and begin to feather this in onto the tail so it's nice and neat, and then I'll just real carefully also pull it off any spots I touch the balsa. Then I'm also going to be just using gently by hand underneath here to get this fillet and a nice smooth transition from the body to the tail. One thing to take into consideration when you're sanding this, the balsa will sand very easily, so try to minimize anything that's going to touch the balsa, or if it does, just very, very minimal. So I'm going to use the paper here also, this spot. You can use it to kind of just pop off the spackle that's on the balsa. And begin to just gently work and begin to gently feather this in. And as I begin to work with the lower grit paper, I can be a little bit more aggressive without the fear of taking too much off. You still want to be real careful with it, but you can work it a little bit more. On the top, make sure I bend my elevator down carefully. You're going to begin to see where it's just a nice smooth transition over now. You got minimal amounts here on the elevator itself and the wood. You do want to clean it all off. That stuff is going to show. Okay, I've grabbed some 220 paper. I'm going to go ahead and roll it up to a nice tube and just begin to get in here with the 220 and finish smoothing it out. This is going to make it really nice. It's at this stage when you're doing the 220, you start to see everything just really come together. It comes real smooth. Then when we tape it, we're just going to have a beautiful finish. And this spot up here, this is about done. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of give this a quick block on the side now. Begin to bring that into play. I'm going to use my 80 grit. And again, with light pressure, I just want to go in one direction to start with, knock off the high spots. Don't want to go back and forth real aggressive. Also, I'm using the round spot on my sanding block when I come up against where I'm going to be doing the fillet. I don't want to take any of that off yet. That'll be coming up. Now that I've got the high spots off, though, I can go back and forth, go a little quicker, still going at a 45, but I can be a little bit more aggressive without fear of knocking off anything, a big chunk of it. Trying to define where this fillet's going to be. Okay, we're going to go ahead and just finish the rest of the body up here. You can see how it begins to come together. Okay, now we've got the body ready for taping. Beforehand, we've prepped it just like we did on our wing. It's been wiped down with lacquer thinner. Put a couple pieces of tape over where my switch is and my battery outlet. And again, all I'm going to use 3M Super 7.7 spray. I'm going to hit the foam, again, pretty good. It's going to have a fairly thick layer on, just to the point where it wants to bubble again. So, we'll just get it. Set a fairly thick coat on everything. And once this is done, we're going to set it aside for about 10 minutes or so to dry. Now, I'm spraying the tail here. I'm making sure I get any part that has spackle on it. That's what I'm taking special note of. I'm going to go ahead and spray this saddle right here. I'm going to tape onto that. Okay, we're going to let this sit about 10 minutes, come back and tape. Okay, the fuse is set about 10 minutes now. It's tacky, but not going to stick to the table or anything anymore. Let's go ahead and get some tape on here. One of the things different when you're taping your fuselages compared to taping the wing. On the wing, you're trying not to overlap your tape, just putting it up as a butt joint. That's going to apply to a few places on here, but due to the complexity of the curves that are on a fuselage, and you know, every fuselage is going to be different, we're going to be overlapping tape on here, and so, you know, do what you've got to do to get the tape on. You're going to get a better finish having tape on the fuse other than just going straight over the spackle and foam. Plus, the tape adds so much strength, I would never even consider doing a fuse without it. One thing also to note here, don't put your tape down. In other words, don't really pull it tight when you set it down on the plane itself. What will happen if you do that, when you go back and iron it down, you're going to go ahead and you'll have enough tensile strength on this tape to warp the fuselage, even though it's got carbon fiber in it. So when you lay your stuff down, just lay it down nice and easy, but flat, no wrinkles. And here we go. What I do, I always start from front to back. I'm going to go and keep a piece of tape. I'm going to put it flush up against the bottom of my horizontal stab and bring it up all the way up to the nose. I usually will end the piece of tape right up just in front of the nose cone. So once it's all straight where I want it to go, just laying it down and just gently bringing it forward. I'm going to, right here I can see I'm coming right up to the nose cone. I'm going to trim it. Depending on the actual cut, this is where you're going to start to see where everything wants to wrinkle. This part of the fuse here is actually pretty flat, so I know that this part here is going to lay down without a wrinkle. When I come up here to the next piece, I'll probably need to strip it at least in one spot to let it come down and naturally go without a wrinkle. I'm going to bring it on, and I'm just going to butt this one up right against the bottom. Again, just get a rough measurement. Also, like along the back edge, some of this is going to roll over onto the bottom of the tail. And just gently pressing it down. This piece also right here is going to go ahead and lay down without a wrinkle. I can see that now as it begins to get close. And just gently letting that curve around the scoop. It's nice. Then coming here to the back, I'm going to begin to wrap this around onto the bottom. Show you how to do that. Here, I'm going to be taking this and I'm going to start to press it down in. And I can see as I'm starting to press it down in here that it wants to go ahead and wrinkle. What I'm going to do here, I'm going to make a relief cut right here. Begin to press it down. See that it doesn't want to go anymore. The way this strip is, just the way it's starting to lay, I'm seeing that I don't like stripping this down anymore. I'm going to go ahead and trim it off. I'll put another piece over on top of it on the bottom coming forward. Sometimes as you do this, it just begins to play out where you're going to want to trim stuff off and put a whole new piece on instead of trying to make something else work. You're just going to get a lot cleaner fuse. Take this and I'm just going to pull the strip down. Take this here, and from this point, this is going to allow me to roll this part over. So I'll roll this over and then come back here where it meets the center and trim this off. The wing saddle here overlapped. I want to go ahead and cut the wing saddle out. And it started to bend down onto itself already. Okay, so that's free. Now I'm just going to come back with the scissors and trim it off. I don't want to roll, there's no need to roll the tape over into the wing saddle. You're not going to get any benefit as far as strength on the side there. Yeah, I've been told I should sometimes, say little tips here and there. And I heard the best tip I've probably heard all year long here a minute ago. And that is, never pet a burning dog. Good. Place a cut there. I'm going to take this part completely out. Come over here. Now let this come down. I'm going to strip it right here at the corner edge. Pull it back. Little wrinkles. Trim it here where it overlaps. Okay, what I'm going to do next, you can see here, when I laid this down, okay, these aren't really wrinkles yet until they're sealed. What I'm going to do is iron them down at this point. I'm going to be overlapping this section. I like to iron down any section that's going to overlap ahead of time. It's a lot more difficult to shrink a layer of tape that's underneath a second layer than it is just to do it. Also, this is going to seal it and get these shrunk where they'll be just nice and tight, and I'll have a beautiful smooth finish to work with. Hopefully you can see that there. That's perfect now. I'm going to flip it over, do the same. I'll do that over here. See if this camera will be able to pick it up. Real gentle over this spot, just allowing the heat to do the work at the moment, not really pushing down until it sets it. Now that it's set, go ahead and work the rest of the tape. Had a little overlap right there, so I'm going to give it just a bit longer without moving it to allow that second layer to shrink down. Okay, and that part there, that's where I'm going to be overlapping, so that part's set. I'm good to go. Another thing that I like to do when these are going to overlap, especially like right in here, I'm going to keep some acetone handy. And since I'm going to be putting tape over that, I'm just going to put it just a quick wipe down only on the tape, not touching the phone or the foam, with a little bit of acetone to take off that mold release. That way it sticks to itself really well, and we're not going to have any delaminating problems. Measure over here. I'm just going to place the first one in the center. Now, I start at the back where it's pretty well flat. Bring it forward and see what it's going to do if it wants to wrinkle. I can already tell just because of the amount of bend that we've got here. If I take this any farther, it will start to wrinkle. I haven't set it yet. What I'm going to do before that, I'm going to make probably on this one 4 strips and let them lay where they want. The thing is to let it naturally follow the curve so you don't put a wrinkle. I've probably said that 100 times already, but it's very important. And that piece is down. What I'm going to do, because just the way these pieces are all going to come together, I'm going to trim it all at once I lay everything down. I'm going to put in a piece right there. Now this piece here, what I'm going to be doing, it's going to have a small overlap again, but on this piece, I want to wipe it down with a little bit of that acetone. Now this piece doesn't have any wrinkles, so I don't need to iron it. But I'm going to take this, I'm going to lay it, in this case it's going to cover the front edge of the wing saddle. I'm going to lay it back just a bit over and I'll be trimming that out. I'm going to set the center of the tape, keeping it a little tension on the front, and roll it over and get this area smooth. Now from here, because of the extreme bend that the P51 has at the very front, I need to strip this down almost all the way back to here. But what I've done is I've taken this area, and this is going to be nice and straight and flat. I'll trim out for the saddle. Take one strip at a time. This here, what I'll do is I just roll it over on itself for a second, get it out of the way. Take this, let it naturally lay where it wants. Putting a small amount of tension, being that this is a small piece, not a piece going across the entire nose, we're not going to warp the fuse at all, but pulling a little bit of tension on it, tapping it down, and then this piece, the final, coming in. And now we've been able to do the entire nose without a wrinkle on this side. I'm going to come through at the back just because I want to be able to get my scissors in. If I do the next piece, I can't bring them in easily. Going to trim out. Get rid of the excess here. Don't need it. Won't make any difference when we cover it. I'm going to show you right here on the tail. This is where we're going to blend the body up onto the vertical, and back here you can see where the spackle had left a small gap. We're going to go ahead and fill this all in right now with tape. I'm going to move my horizontal stab so it's flush. Cut a piece of tape here. What I'm doing, I'm holding this so it doesn't want to stick on to the surface, riding it up, and I'm going to position this so it's sitting about 1 inch or so above the horizontal stabilizer, but only about 1/8 of an inch away from it. As far as you see here, it's right up next to where the linkage is. And then once I let it hit the back edge here, or the bottom, I'm going to just gently roll this up now so I don't have any wrinkles, but it's going to create a nice fluid transition from the body up onto the horizontal stab, and it'll fill any gaps. I don't need to tape up onto the balsa itself. And then here, I can just take this, I'm going to trim the bottom off. It doesn't need to be full length. That side's done. We'll show you the other side here. Now this side here has a little larger gap. This is going to, I think, illustrate a little better what this is going to do. Again, coming up underneath so it doesn't stick to the airplane itself. Come about 1 inch up, set it on the tail, and gently let this roll into place. I'm just going to fill that gap, and you're going to see here where that gap was is now filled up. It's not going to touch the elevator at all. It won't bind. And when we cover this, it's going to be a clean, smooth transition up. All right, now that the wing's all taped up and ironed down, we're going to go ahead and mount it to the body. There's a couple things we need to do before we actually get our bolts marked off. First of all, we need to make sure that the wing is square to the fuselage. and straight. And there's two ways of doing that. We're going to be using a ruler, and what we're going to do, you're going to find a center point on the fuse. In this case, we just use the center half. So I'm going to use the top portion of the tail saddle right here, and I'm going to be measuring that to the tip of the ailerons, and then to go to square. And I'll use a ruler. Another way of doing it that works pretty well is just use some type of string. In this case, it might be hard to see in the film, but I've just got some 10-pound fishing line, and I'm just going to take that and tape it right here to the tip, right on the center mark, and then it'll just be a matter of holding it out and moving it side to side to make sure it's square. Once it's square, I'm going to draw a couple marks on it, flip the plane over, keeping everything in place, draw a couple marks on the bottom, and then I'm going to begin to measure out exactly where the mounting blocks are in the fuselage so I can mark the holes and get them drilled for the bolts. Being that the P-51 has an under wing scoop, I'm just going to use a piece of tape here to make sure that it's sitting up off the bottom, and it's going to be flat to the body, or flat to the wing saddle. So use a ruler here. I've got 31 5/8 there, and being careful not to move the body. I've got about 31 5/16. So I'm off just a little bit. What I need to do is lengthen this side. So put a little twist right in it here. It takes me to 31 1/2. And exactly 31 1/2 on that tip right there. So what I'm going to do is right here at the edge of the body, I'm going to make a mark on each side, holding it straight, steady. I'm going to go ahead and flip it over. And what I do here, because I know that it's square to the body at this point, where the center line of the fuse is, I'm going to put just a pen mark, and a pen mark here on the wing at the center line of the fuse. Now I know that when I can take the wing off, as soon as I set it back in that position, I'm square. So what I'm going to be doing here is take the ruler. I like to hold the ruler approximately the way the airfoil is going to sit on, to kind of mimic the bend of the bottom of the airfoil. And I just eyeball down. I know that this mounting block here is at an angle, that the bolt's going to be coming up at an angle. I just try to imagine exactly where that bolt's going to be coming through this spot on the wing where I have to drill it. So holding it back, looking down, eyeballing it. I'm going to use the side with the 16th marks. I would say that the center of that is right at 3/4 of an inch off the front of the block here. And on the back of the wing saddle, looking down, I'm going to say the center of that is exactly 15/16. That's where I need to be. So taking my ruler, I'm going to put my mark right on the center line at 3/4. Now, you may or may not be able to see it with the camera, but this hard piece of 1/8 inch plywood that we put underneath here is just right directly beneath this. Now, after the phone call here, just going to measure off the back, make sure that I'm right at the 15/16 mark that I had. Now, got the holes marked. Again, visually what I want to do is I just want to I'm going to be going over to the drill press and drilling a hole. I want to drill these so that they're the exact angle or very, very close to the angle that the bolt's going to go into the mounting block. I know on the front bolt here I'm going to be drilling it at probably about 10 degrees and the rear probably only about 4 or 5 degrees to match the contour of the top of the airfoil. So off to the drill press. Now that the wing's mounted, I'm going to go ahead and set the tail on and go ahead and mark around the tail and get the front strake of the tail countersunk down into the body. So, you know, the P-51 didn't have a bump here, so we need to countersink this down.